If I don't, I will forget it, and that will be too bad because it's going to be a great webinar, I think.
Barb, are you speaking?
No, I am now. Can you hear me now, Nana?
Totally.
Okay, good. All right, welcome everybody. Why don't we go ahead and get started? We have a lot of ground to cover and a lot of exciting things to talk about. Thank you so much for joining us today on our final webinar in support of the Positive Organizing Project. We have been doing some additional trainings as the coaches from the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus in partnership with AIDS United have seen the implementation of this grant and have identified a couple of areas where we can pull together some extra support. If you haven't had a chance to watch the webinar from about 2 weeks ago, I would highly recommend it. It was collaborating with the youth leaders to include them in a MIPA-centered organization. And Caleb, Milan, and Rich were incredible presenters, and they shared a lot of their expertise working and organizing in youth-centered spaces. So if you do not have that link, let me know and I'll send it. I sent that to everyone fairly soon after the webinar happened, but if you have misplaced it or would like it again, just let me know, because it is a, I think actually probably one of the best webinars that I have ever been able to listen to, and to have some really unique and creative solutions around populations, especially young leaders that we often feel we have a difficult time connecting with. So thank you to our presenters for that. Today, we're going to answer a different need. We have been reaching a little bit of, as we come to the end of the grant, we have been hearing from people that they are concerned about the sustainability of their projects, that they have had some incredible successes this year as a part of the Positive Organizing grants from AIDS United, and that they want to continue the work and are not sure how to do that both individually and organizationally. And so Nana Khanna is joining me today to help us kind of creatively think of some new ways about funding and sourcing our projects, as well as supporting ourselves as leaders. So I hope that you find today's presentation as useful and able to support your work. General information, this is being presented as part of the AIDS United Positive Organizing Project. Feel free to share slides and recordings. We want the expertise to be able to be shared. And if you have comments or parts that we missed or that you felt we were really off base, we'd love that feedback as well. We do these webinars every year, not this particular one, but if there is an area that we have missed, it would be great to start thinking about possibly doing it with a partner organization or putting it on file for next year. This webinar is being recorded, and I am just double checking to make sure that that is true. Yes, it is being recorded. So if you need to step off or step away, we understand that life happens. So it will be recorded and you are also able to share that. Feel free to ask questions in the chat box. Everybody is muted. Looks like we have about 14 people who are on the call today, which is great. We want to make sure that everybody can hear okay, and so everybody is muted. If you would like to, you can go ahead and raise your hand or ask a question in the chat box, and we will go ahead and answer it as we can. My name is Barb Cardell. I am the Vice Chair of the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus. I am also the lead coach for the Positive Organizing Project. And I also have to share that I am currently in Dallas, Texas, getting ready to do my site visit with one of the amazing Positive Organizing projects with PWN Texas, which is working on deepening the bench and meaningful leadership. And so I look forward to meeting all the organizers from Dallas later today, as well as in Houston tomorrow. But I have to brag on them because I think they're pretty exceptional. But I'm also biased because I think every project that we have is exceptional. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Nana.
Great. Thanks so much, Barb. And welcome, everyone. It's so great to see some of your faces. And I know that this is such an important time because your POP projects are kind of coming to a close, and your work is so important, which is why we wanted to host this particular webinar. We really want to think about how we can support you in making sure your work continues to happen, and that you continue to be supported and resourced to do the important work all of you are doing in your communities. And as I think Barb and I have kind of expressed to you before, and the caucus I hope has conveyed to you, we believe that this Positive Organizing Project work is some of the most important work that's happening in the country. We really believe in leadership by communities most impacted by the epidemic. We believe that your work to build that leadership pipeline, to do advocacy, to do creative cultural work, to increase meaningful participation is the most important work that needs to be resourced. And so we want to help you think about how to do that, and hopefully grapple together with any questions about how to sustain this. So we can go to the next slide. And Barb, I don't know if it's possible to promote me so that I can advance my own slides, but if you can, that would be great. So I wanted to just start off with a question about what sustainability means to you. So we'd love to hear from you on this. So I think folks are muted, so if you want to just chime in on the chat box. What does sustainability mean to you?
I also just unmuted all the participants, so if anybody wants to chime in, they can.
This is my first time. This is Thomas Green.
Hey, Thomas.
How you doing? This is my first time involved with POP, and I was just wondering how what's going to happen in the future. Is there another POP project grant that will be coming through? How is it? And would it actually become a different program with a different focus?
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. And I'm taking notes on the, kind of questions that are coming up, and I'm gonna address that throughout the presentation. So thank you for that.
All right, thanks.
So,
I guess this is Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
I guess for me, sustainability would be like a long-term goal.
Mm-hmm. Say more. What do you mean?
I guess a long-term goal, as in, if you had a project that was to be sustained either again for another year of funding with this project, or if it was to get sustained under, a different stream of funding, or just, what is the ultimate goal with this? Like, what does, sorry, they're doing construction here at my site, so it's a little loud. But what is like the ultimate goal with this? Like, what would completion and success ultimately look like for this project?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are great questions. I also see a couple of chats. So if folks are not able to unmute, I can share what's in those chats. So Kunane says a vision of where we're going with these activities, including a plan for funding and resources to support the vision. Also hearing from Angela, for us, sustainability means having the proper resources to continue the work that we have already started. These are all really fantastic. Anything else folks want to add?
Nana, this is Kevin, and as we grapple with this, as we move forward with modernization of Idaho's HIV law, we have started to refine our recruiting a little bit. We have recently found a person who has great grant writing skills. Mm-hmm. So as we move forward and we identify different areas that will allow us to concentrate on the work, you know, and part of that's got to be how you fund yourself and other areas of sustainability. We will continue targeting people in the HIV communities around Idaho that can help us work towards those goals.
Yeah, these are really great points. I think, you know, I'm hearing everything from how do we sustain the work we're already doing to like developing people power and expertise and kind of expanding expertise within our communities. Also, yeah, getting clear about, you know, sort of long-term goals. What does success actually look like? Anything else folks want to add? And also specific questions about the future of the POP grant program, which I can also talk about a bit. Anything else folks want to add in before we move on?
This is Kiara. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Kiara.
Yeah. Hey. So I don't know if it's been at having multiple funding streams is critical. Also, having folks who can assist, especially trans-led agencies, with capacity building, so that we can be so that we're not just getting funded, but we're actually being able to be successful with the funding that we do receive. Mm-hmm. That's really important.
That's great. Thank you so much. So perfect. These are excellent points. So let's move on to the next slide. I think you all have brought up a lot of really important stuff. Oh, I'm sorry. Is there another slide before this? I think there is. Can you go back? Yeah. So these are just a few aspects of sustainability. Resource stability, which can include, you know, money, including multiple funding streams, including like maintaining existing funding streams if they're working for you. But it's also about other types of resources that we need and can get, you know, that helps us sustain our movement. So that could include like, where are you meeting? Is somebody like giving you access to a photocopier to, you know, to print flyers and that kind of thing. And then also, what does your sustainability plan look like around leadership development, which is such an integral part of the work you all are doing anyway. So how is that sort of integrated into your sustainability vision, your sustainability plan for your work? And then also, you know, the truth that sometimes leaders move on and do other things, either, you know, for various reasons. So what does it look like to do that in a way that's healthy for your project, for your organization, and for yourselves, and in a way that's not just about somebody got burned out or wasn't compensated enough for what they were doing and had to go somewhere else. You know, sometimes that's going to be true, but how do we make those transitions as healthy as possible and as intentional as possible? And then really thinking about how relationships get shared so that projects can be sustainable and the work itself can be sustainable. If one leader is the only person that can sort of be identified, or somebody's holding all of the funding relationships, like what is the role of sort of relationship transfer, even within our own communities and amongst us as peers who are all, you know, working on leading these sort of community-based projects? How can we share resources like relationships to get more for all of us? And then I think it also kind of connects to Kiara's point about the capacity building that might be needed, different kinds of resources that might be needed. So we're going to go kind of in depth on a few more of these. And you go to the next slide, please. So I want to just start with talking about how important it is that you all are telling your story about what you're doing. And I know that this is something you, different grantees are working on in different ways, but there's a little bit of background noise. If somebody could mute if they are like clinking a spoon, that would be great. Thank you. So, you know, you all are doing incredible work. I've seen some of it. I haven't had the chance to see all of it. But I think there's a question about like how much do other people know about the amazing work you're doing? So like, you know, for example, Thomas, I saw a little clip of a video from your performance on Andy's phone the other day. It was awesome. I was so inspired and so moved. And I know that you all are, you know, you have photos from events you've done. You have like reports that are all going to get submitted to AIDS United. Don't let AU be the only audience for those. This is an incredible work that you all are doing. You trained how many people? You reached how many people? You put together a performance. You ran a phone bank. What did you do? Tell your story. So think about how you can tell your story externally. Where might you be able to tell it? Can you write a blog? AU has a blog where they feature grantees. You could, offer to write a blog for them. PWN has a blog on our website. We'd be happy to share your stuff. We'd also be happy to link it if you're sharing it somewhere else so that your own website gets kind of bumped up and gets things like that. And really kind of highlighting, you know, what is the exciting thing you did? It could be one thing, it could be all the things. It can be about the POP project, and it can be about more than the POP project, and talking about why your group and the individuals involved in your groups were the right ones to do it. And so, really, I think we often tend to spend so much time on things like grant reporting that we forget that like, actually these are like powerful stories that are just going into like some online portal and never going anywhere else. And those stories can help drive resources and attention to your work and position you in the community. So, also there are lots of other ways to do that, you can go to the next slide. So other kinds of creative ways that you could do that are submitting an op-ed to your local paper. Is there a policy issue going on in your local community that kind of connects to your work? If there's lots of stuff going on about health, about HIV, about budgets, state budgets, getting developed, politicians making crazy statements. If you can write, some sort of response in your local newspaper or a local blog or something like that and say, hey, this, here's what you think about this and why. And by the way, here's who we are. And here's a photo of our amazing work. These are really great ways to just sort of like reach into your community and create more community visibility. And part of the reason that I'm focusing on creating more visibility first is because I think, I will address the question about the POP grant cycle. As far as I know, it is planned to continue. There will be another round of POP funding, but I think that all of us should be thinking about, as Kiara pointed out, getting other sorts of investments and not just being dependent on one funder, one funding stream. And some of those funders are local, right? So having local visibility really makes a difference too. People like to resource stuff that they feel like is making their community better. So if you're saying we're engaging, we're engaging young people in changing the system in our community, or we're engaging in conversations around like police brutality in our community. People really like things they can feel, that feel tangible to them. So generating visibility is a great way to generate resources. And also, community events and actions. So things like performances are awesome. Community forums. It's obviously, we all know it's a hot election year right now. Every local candidate is doing candidate forums, and we'll be doing them all summer long and through November. So can you roll with your crew, all wearing your t-shirts, for your project or your the work that you're doing together, to show your presence and ask them some important questions about issues that matter to you and matter to the community you're serving. These are all ways to sort of like show your presence in the community. I'm sure folks have lots of other ideas. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep it moving, and we can come back to discussions and Q&A later. Next slide, please. So also, I do want to talk about the question of funding, and I have several sort of slides that focus on this. So part of what I would encourage folks to think about, and I know people are at different types of relationships with their project and their organization. Some of you are housed in an organization that is supporting a project. Others are or have your project and your vision and are just sort of like loosely attached to an organization that happened to get the POP grant or that you worked with around the POP grant. So as you're thinking about other work you might do in the future, I think some considerations, depending on your sort of organizational home, are there other ways to get resources? Are there other places to get it through? And as you're considering who you might do that with, which if you're not an incorporated 501c3, if you're like a group of individuals, or if you are somebody who's thinking about expanding your work in various ways, think about who could you work with that will really support the project in a way that is allowing for what you want to see, for autonomy, for self-determination, for meaningful involvement by the most impacted communities. And as you're looking at exploring organizational homes for your project, I propose, just sort of like a list of some questions you could consider. I think these can also be useful in, future conversations around things like if you want to reapply for the POP grant, and if you're exploring maybe a new fiscal sponsor for that, for those of you that don't have like an organization that you're particularly working for. You can ask some questions like, are you open to developing an MOU with like XYZ? Know what your XYZ is before. And ask for real clarity about decision-making about the project and strategy, about how the budget will get decided. We all know that, budget kind of reflects values and often reflects power. And so who's being written into the staffing line items on these projects, both, not just POP, but any project you want to do. And then real logistical stuff, like how will it actually work for us? If we need to get stipends for folks for a community event, how is that going to work in practice? How long does it take? That kind of thing. You can also approach organizations, if you're not attached to one, if you're thinking about applying for the next round of POP, you can approach an organization and say, hey, will you hire us if we can get this grant to work on this project? Will you bring us on as staff, one or more of us? Here's what we would want to do. And here are some of our negotiating points around that. You would get this funding. We would get a staff position and to run this project for a period of time, something like that. Next slide, please. Also, so where can you look for funding? Certainly, yes, the POP grant cycle, we do expect to renew. I think usually that RFP comes out in the fall, around August or September. It's a short grant cycle, as you all know. So the RFP will come out in probably August or September. We don't know what's in it yet. We have not kind of been in touch about the year 4 grant cycle yet. I think what happens is basically all the stuff gets reported into the funder in June, and then they use that to make a case for additional funding for the next year. So certainly we do expect that the POP funding will be available, but I really want to encourage you to think bigger and not only rely on one funding source and not only rely even on HIV. So some other places to look, and some of you have a lot of experience in this, but you can look at local and state level foundations. You can look at local private corporations. You can think about business development groups in your community. Often there are particular business development groups, like a chamber of commerce, that do give away some resources every year. Here in Oakland, we have a pretty powerful Black Business Owners Coalition. They do some small grants. They help with events. Many of them own spaces and may donate spaces in kind for events and things like that. So these are things to think about. And then also definitely think about, look at any corporations that are based in your city or state, because usually they have money to give away. Most of them have some kind of philanthropic arm, and like a local bank, even your Walgreens has has like a pharmacy, and they actually make a lot of money off of HIV, and they give some of that away. Here in the Bay Area, we even have companies like Chevron, which is a horrible corporation, but they have given money to HIV stuff in the past. They're here basically like polluting the entire community. The community hates them. So giving some money away locally is a way for them to like clean up their corporate image a little bit. So think about those, you know, kind of like bad players too, that are trying to like restore their community image. And then of course, think about in-kind stuff. It really adds up. You know, we, PWN managed a couple of, we helped to work with a couple of the grantees this year. There were a lot of line items that that sometimes could be like offset or augmented with like in-kind donations from local companies. So if you need supplies, if you need, you know, electronics, there may be companies out there that can help to donate that stuff to you. Like a lot of people need things like laptops, tablets to be able to go out and do community work. You may be able to get some of that stuff donated, as well as, of course, developing relationships with like grocery stores who might have a program to like give away a certain amount of money like every quarter or something like that, or in-kind contributions. I know when I've been doing election work, sometimes I've just like showed up at places and asked for stuff, and sometimes they were really ready to give it away. Like in the 2008 election cycle, which I'm sure everybody remembers, we were all very excited about one particular candidate. I was doing GOTV in Ohio, and we were trying to keep people in line because the early voting lines were so long. There was such remarkable turnout. We were trying to keep people there and not have them leave. And in order to do that, like folks were having to wait in line for 6 or 8 hours to vote. People brought their whole families. It was really beautiful. You know, multiple generations were there. Little kids were there. But in order to keep people in those lines, we needed like food and water. They couldn't stand there. There's no food in the you know, in the county like registrar's offices. So we were running around to like grocery stores and pizza places. And some of them were like, oh, you're doing that? And they just like one, I think it was either like a Target or a Walmart we went to. They filled an entire shopping cart with like snacks and drinks and candy for us. And we're like, oh yeah, just use this, just like take it and go. And we hadn't expected that. And that was just like the local manager was so excited about what we were doing. It wasn't a company policy. So, you know, never be afraid to ask. People like to support good work, and sometimes they're really excited to do it. Next slide, please. And those might seem like sort of small things, but they all totally add up. Okay, I'm going to talk just a little bit about tips for writing grants. And I'm going to try to breeze through this a bit quickly, but these slides will be available. Next slide, please. So grants are, you know, of course, not the only way to fundraise, is part of what I'm trying to highlight, but grants are an important way. And in our system that's sort of been structured by all these like kind of white supremacist and patriarchal ideals, they're sometimes the only way to get access to like significant amount of money that can give you some stability. So, however, I think it's really important to approach grant writing strategically. And so I recommend that like the first step, and I think this speaks a little bit to what somebody raised, I think it was Thomas and somebody else, about like long-term goal, what does success really look like, is I believe that the first step is always to get clear about what you want to do. So as much as possible, be clear about your vision. What is your group's vision? What is your collective group's vision? And what are the things you really want to make happen? The grant that comes is just an instrument to get resources that support your vision. What you write for the grant is not your vision, right? Sometimes you actually don't want to tell the funder your real vision, because that might not be what they're about supporting. You're like, oh, I'm really here to build, power of communities of color to like decolonize the system. Well, your funder doesn't need to know all that. They just need to know you're going to do X number of trainings, and maybe you're going to bring this many people to an event and things like that. So, but you need to be clear about your vision. So one of the approaches I like to use is called purpose outcomes process. And I use this in lots of things, including meetings. It's basically just one format that you can use to kind of think about any particular the goal of any particular process. So the purpose is like the why, right? Like, why am I doing this? That can be applied to like a meeting. Why are we having this meeting? We're having this meeting to like agree on goals for XYZ. But in this case, your purpose is like, what are we here to do? And most of you have like a clear vision, a vision statement. You probably have a plan for what you're trying to do in the world. That's the purpose, right? And that's what, and if you don't know what that is, like you can like facilitate conversations about that. You can reach consensus on it. Maybe your purpose is in the next 2 years. Here's what we want to see. Or this is why our group exists. So, you know, this is kind of like, why does our group exist sort of thing. But then what the funders really care about more is like the pieces of the outcomes and the process. So the outcomes are, you know, if my purpose is like, I want to build political voice and representation by young people living with HIV in Oakland so that I can direct more resources towards youth-focused programs in Oakland. That can be my purpose. I might never tell the funder that I'm actually like, I'm planning a takeover of the planning council, and I'm like trying to get folks into these institutions and all of that. The funder may or may not need to really know that. It depends on the funder, right? But what they do want to know is like, what kind of impact what am I actually going to accomplish, right? Those are the outcomes. So, you know, in the first year, like by the end of 2019, here's what we want to see happen. Here's how we're going to know that we're getting to that goal. So 3 young people living with HIV, these are just examples, will gain seats on the planning council. 2 local organizations that provide HIV services will like commit to adopting our recommendations for youth-friendly services. You know, you can think about those types of outcomes. These are things that can totally go into a grant proposal. The process is the how. So this is what you do last. And often, you know, sometimes we do this first because of the way grants are set up. So usually what they ask you to do is, most grants are actually asking you for process outcomes, or don't really ask you to think about your impact. But if we're really serious about, you know, building power, about changing systems, about changing the way things work for our communities, you know, about making sure that people living with HIV have a meaningful voice, then actually what we probably want to really think about is our impact, which is those outcomes. Many funders are comfortable with just this process level. So like, we will train, you know, we will provide X number of trainings. You know, 8 people will provide public testimony at these meetings. We're going to meet with 5 legislators. We're going to provide these organizations with workshops, etc. That is definitely a level at which you can write your grant, but it should never be the only level at which we are thinking about our work, right? Because the work is always towards a larger purpose. So those kinds of things can, you know, these are like the instruments that are helping you get to your outcomes. The process here, these things are like, because you developed a 2-hour workshop on creating youth-friendly services and you delivered an in-service to 4 organizations, that's how you're going to get 2 organizations to make a commitment to adopting your recommendations, right? So, so I think, to me, this is the most important part about grant writing. Often, I think, you know, we are continually faced with having to tailor our vision to what funders are willing to do, which is okay. That's just reality, because that's how we resource our work. But we should never let our vision be limited by what funders are willing to resource, right? So these grants and funding opportunities are instruments to get to our vision. Next slide, please. So also, as you're exploring potential new funders, you know, there are lots of ways to do this. Some cities have something called the Foundation Center or Foundation Library, where you can go and look at their computers and kind of look up local foundations. But you can also Google this stuff and look around on the website, you know, in your local community. If you go to events and see this is sponsored by, you know, this X corporation, go look at that corporation's website and see what kind of corporate philanthropy they do. They're obviously doing something for someone. So what you want to do is figure out who's giving resources in your community and figure out if there's some alignment there. So this is all public information. Anytime a grant is given away, it will show up the next year on that organization's 990. The 990 is something that that everybody has to file with the federal government, with the IRS, and their public record. And you can Google this, you can look on GuideStar, which is a nonprofit website. So not every funder cares about HIV. Not every funder cares about MIPA. Not every funder cares about justice. That's okay. Like, you still might be able to find a match. So, just continuing with this like youth and HIV example, here are just a few like kind of examples I came up with. If you have a funder that loves to support the arts, what about going to them for something like a Theater of the Oppressed workshop series for your young people? Because maybe they're really interested in the artistic part, and maybe you are too, but maybe what you're also interested in is like, we want to get our people to be able to tell their stories effectively to their legislators, and they're going to learn to do that through this workshop. Or we want to address trauma in our community, and Theater of the Oppressed is like, it's basically like a kind of like performance-based kind of like therapy tool in some ways that people can use to help people connect with their own personal process and stories. Another example is like, if you have a funder who cares about LGBT issues, focus your proposal on LGBT youth and, maybe some of the dynamics in that community. If a funder cares about housing, you could talk to them about how young people with HIV are marginally housed and might be at risk for losing their housing. And maybe you're going to train your young people to show up at the Housing Commission and, have a voice there. So these are just a few examples to like help you think about how, even if a funder appears to have like no focus on HIV, even if they've never funded an HIV organization, and that's what your work is about, there are still doors that are open. So you want to kind of like look at these doors, look at the kinds of grants they give, and look at the language they use. When they talk about the kind of things they fund, they're giving you clues about how to approach your grant proposal. So think about tailoring to that. Next slide, please. Then, of course, there's the mechanics. So actually writing the grant, writing the budget. This is, you all probably know all this, I'm sure, but as you're exploring potential new funders, because only some of them are going to come across our email, some of these we're going to have to seek out to really get sustainability of our projects. So look at their application process and their timeline. Do they have a rolling timeline? Most foundations don't. Most have like, we take applications in the spring and in the fall, or we take applications once a year or something like that. But look at those dates. If they're already announced, even if they haven't opened the RFP yet, put those dates in your calendar and put a note in your calendar to like check back on their website, like a month before those deadlines and see if there's an announcement out there. You want to give yourself as much time as possible to work on these grants, because sometimes you need to, you might realize you need to get input along the way. Maybe you have maybe you need to talk to your community about what are some of the highest priorities right now in getting to our vision, what might be able to get funded or resourced. So I like to have at least 3 weeks to work on a grant. Sometimes that's not possible, but that way you can really have a more consultative process, put together a draft, maybe first take input, put together a draft, and then go back with a draft to folks who need to provide input. And not everyone, as we know, is comfortable providing input in writing. So something you can do is say, you could bring like, here are the 4 goals we're thinking about proposing for this grant. How does that sound? You can bring that to your meeting and get feedback on it there, and ask folks like to verbally tell you, what would they want changed? What ideas do they have to get to those goals? What do they think is the highest priority, etc. This, I'm sure a lot of you probably know, but if you're writing online grants in like an online portal, there is nothing worse than spending a bunch of time working on a grant and like losing that work part way because the system just like logged you off due to inactivity, or like you had to pick up a phone call and you got signed out, and all kinds of things can go wrong. So really try to work on those somewhere else. Like either sometimes they have a downloadable version of the question, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you need to like copy and paste the questions or like put them in a separate document. And like make a plan for working on the grant. So looking at it ahead of time is so important, because you don't want to be surprised along the way that this has happened to me before. The grant was like way longer and way more complicated than I thought it was going to be. And I kind of like ran out of time to do the best possible job on it. And that sucks. Or it's like, oh, suddenly they want to know, all this data that at the last minute you're trying to put together some data. So looking at everything, taking the time to look at everything, so that you can also pull other people into the process and have them help you is really good. Maybe like one person can be getting some data and another person can be like, pulling together, do you need like an epi profile of your local epidemic? Can somebody else write up a summary from your planning council report of the epi profile, in whatever the word limitation is, and put together a first draft of that. Really thinking about a plan that includes all the resources you have at your disposal, including your people power. And making sure that it's clear who's like ultimately accountable for these different pieces and who's ultimately accountable for submitting the proposal. And then, the budget, I think it sort of goes back and forth from my perspective between the budget and the narrative. The budget should clearly support the work you're saying you're going to do, but also you probably already know what you want to pay for. Like, what the highest priorities are to resource. So it's a little bit of a give and take there. If you already know that like really what you need to do is you need to hire someone, or what you really need to do is be able to give people honoraria for their time for stuff that they're already doing as volunteers, like make sure that your proposal addresses that and really supports it, right? So your budget should match the narrative. It should always match the narrative. If you told them that that you need 10 people to show up at a meeting and provide testimony, what do those 10 people need in terms of resources to be able to do that? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I'm just going to end with this, and transition over to Barb for the next section, which is going to focus more on sustainable leadership. Sustaining ourselves is also an important part of this work. I know that we've talked about it in our POP convening when we all came together. We talked a lot about the impact that doing this work has on us, that it's intense. Everybody who's doing this work is doing it because we care deeply about the community. Many of us are also personally impacted. And so I just wanted to kind of reiterate that sustaining ourselves should be also built into our thinking about sustainability, both from a financial perspective and other perspectives. So, if what you really need as a leader is like a way to step back, or what you really need is a way to take some projects off your plate, not add more to your plate, or if what you really need is more help and more people, think about how that can be part of your sustainability vision for the work that you're doing. And then also just acknowledging that this political moment in particular, is a really hard one for all of us, for a variety of reasons. And that sustainability of ourselves is sustainability for our movements. So I'm just going to go ahead and end there and turn this over to Barb to walk us through the next section. And I think we'll have time for like questions and discussion at the end.
Super, thank you, Nana. That was a tour de force about the nuts and bolts, especially grant writing, and I appreciate that, because I think that it is oftentimes easy for us to think that the positive organizing grant is one of the few that we can qualify for. And while it is one of our grants that is specifically dedicated to developing positive leadership, it is not the only one. And I think that that is an important sustainability tool. Now I want to take a step back, and I actually want to talk just about sustainable leadership as a general principle and healthy sustainable leadership. When we talk about sustainable leadership, there are a couple of principles, and it's really interesting. I did a bunch of research about sustaining leadership in both political movements and social justice movements, and then I started realizing that there was a common thread in many areas, in union organizing, in political campaigns, and in education advocacy and education justice. And so I just, really kind of pulled them together into a couple of principles. There's 7 of them that are principles of sustainable leadership. And, you know, we can talk about examples around meaningfully engaging leaders living with HIV in this particular webinar, but I just was struck by the commonality of this ongoing effort. The people really are looking at how do you sustain your organization, how do you provide financing, how do you receive grants, but then also sustainability of individuals and programs within that. So how do we ensure that if we leave, that their project continues without us? It's that charismatic leader kind of principle where as soon as you're gone, people try to carry it on, but they are not able to. And how do we move away from that sort of person-based advocacy into something that is more sustainable, that's developing a broader base of leaders living with HIV? And I think that's what we heard really powerfully from the youth in the webinar, was that they are there and they are ready and they are interested in participating in decisions that impact their lives. But a lot of times they are not brought to the table in ways that feels meaningful to them, or that language that's used unintentionally perhaps can help them to feel like they're not valued, or that their opinions are given less weight than somebody who has been there for a while. And so I think that as we look at these principles, you know, we can think about them in many different kinds of ways. And I mean nothing wrong about, or no challenge about being a manager, but I think they're different skills. And this is about leadership. So you can decide if you want to be a leader or you can be a manager. And what that means to me, and I'd be curious what it means to other people, is that a leader is a visionary who brings along people, who creates new programs and new visions to solve new crises or challenges, or has new approaches to old challenges. I think the manager is somebody who comes in and is successful at maintaining a status quo, or maintaining a program that has been very effective. But as Nana mentioned, these times that we're in are really difficult. And so for all of us here, I'm not sure that we have the luxury of being able to manage a program. I think that we need to be more innovative and more of a leader than a manager in that area. But I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody and see if anybody else has an idea about a leader versus a manager and sustainable leadership that they'd like to share. So everybody's unmuted if you have a point that you want to bring, or you can put it in the chat box. And again, we were just kind of talking about the difference between being a leader and a manager, or a visionary, an implementer, or someone who is sustaining. And what does that mean for you and your organization as a positive organizing project leader, but also sort of once you move beyond that? All right, so it sounds like that has some thoughts going on, that people are processing that. So I'm going to go ahead and just put everybody back on mute, unless somebody had one last thought that they wanted to share. So hopefully by the time we're done. Oh yeah, Thomas, great.
Hey, I mean, I guess for me, when I'm thinking about the difference between a manager and a leader, I guess it kind of comes down to like the delegation part of it, whereas somebody that's a leader, I guess, is really thinking about how to get from point A to point B and what needs to happen. And then a manager would be more so, I guess, following what the leader put out for them, and what in terms of helping figure out, okay, like if this is what needs to happen, this is what's been identified, how does what I do help with that? I guess leadership is more the futuristic thinking and strategy behind it, and then the manager is more the implementer.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Thomas. I think that's absolutely correct. I think a lot of the leadership is about creativity and really unique responses to challenges or new solutions, new programs that can come up. And the reason why I'm sort of kind of standing in this is that organizationally and project-wise, we need both. We need the visionary who comes up with a great idea and, as Nana said, is able to build momentum among the team around writing the grant to gain the funds to support the project. And then we also need the person who can implement it, sustain it, and ensure that the deliverables are met. So I think that is, yep.
Yeah, this is Thomas Green.
Yeah, hi, Thomas.
With APAIT. I've been working as the coordinator for the POP program here at APAIT, but at times I've had to perform as a leader to get people together and to get them jazzed to participate and really have enthusiasm. So that's part of also the inspirational part of leading people.
Yeah, great point. And you just had your final POP project yesterday, right, in LA?
On Wednesday, yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So thank you. Yeah, I think that, a couple of the things that we've talked about is visionary, innovator, but also sustainer, and I think that those all are part of being a leader on a project. So I'm just gonna move along here. So these are the principles that I just sort of kind of put together, and I thought they were kind of fun. Hopefully they're helpful, but they're all in the sustainable leadership matters, blah, 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 fill in the blank kind of thing. So the first principle is just about moving beyond this tokenistic expectation that you're just going to be doing this one project and that you're then going to move on to something else. And so that would be, you have a very narrow capacity to call people in. You have the same advocates, you have the same leaders that are being brought in, and the project really hasn't amplified out into the community. So it's about, as Wahida talks about organizing around projects, Wahida Shabazz El, who is the organizing director for PWN, talks about it needs to be something that is widely impacting people, widely impacts the community, widely engages people, and also deeply engages people so that people also feel really connected. But this tokenistic engagement, without just the anti-MIPA as far as I, believe, is that it is important to have sustainable leaders, but it also is important to bring new leaders on and not just have it be the same old folks. And especially, and I'm just going to keep mentioning it because I think it's so important, that when we're talking about engaging new leaders and certainly bringing them into projects, that we are looking at intersectionality. We look at the communities that are most impacted, and if they are not part of the conversations, then we need to figure out how they can be brought in and empowered to feel engaged, whether it is people of trans experience, whether it's our youth leaders, whether it's some of our elders in the movement. We need to make sure that they are engaged in a way that feels meaningful and has impact both to them and to the project. Next, sustainable leadership lasts. This is this flash in a pan kind of thing, and it's the charismatic leader, which is that we all know aid service organizations that have done really well when they had that one charismatic leader who set all the programs and was able to really define and vision things in a way that's really unique. When you talk about your projects and you talk about meaningful involvement in developing leaders in the community, you want to make sure that you plan for who succeeds you as well. And so, Thomas, this goes to what you were saying about delegation as well, which is that, the person who succeeds you might not be ready to step in today, but there is probably a part of it that they can do, that they can go and run with and put their own unique creative spin on. And that gives them a sense of empowerment to be able to then move on. So it's about skills. It's about ensuring that when we, so using the MIPA language and in the HIV world, you know, if I'm on a planning council, I consider it my first priority to start training my replacements from the very day I come on the council. So I see who can take that place and make sure that they're at meetings, make sure that they understand agendas and that they have a chance to really be trained up. Whether the organization does it or not, that I am a part of that as well. And that's my responsibility as a leader to ensure that that is sustainable. Next up, we have Sustainable Leadership Expands. And this is about, you know, a shared vision. It goes back to the charismatic visionary leader. If it's just my idea and I haven't asked for that input or haven't given people a part of the planning, then it is just my vision. And if I am not able to stay engaged, or when it is time for me to retire, or if I am no longer the appropriate person to be at the table, which is also really something we need to look at, I want to make sure that this visioning process has expanded and has brought so many people forward. Because if it is a torch that we have all envisioned together, then it is very possible for it to continue without me. And it also means that when we're engaging communities that might not be as involved, and especially when we're bringing people who have had less equality, less access to tables of power, by bringing them in and having them share with the vision, we're not doing this perpetuation of white supremacy. We are dismantling it by saying we are all a part of the solution, and it also ensures that there's validity in these communities when this message and this program comes out. Sustainable leadership is socially just. It is easy for us to think organizationally that I'm just going to take my one piece and then I'm going to organize around one particular thing. But we all stand in multiple intersectionalities. And I would dare to say that when there are people who are impacted in unjust ways, whether we see a direct connection between ourselves, that there are people in our community who are impacted, and that injustice for one is injustice for all. So it's important to say that, you know, supporting marginalized groups and ensuring that voices that might not be as present are amplified using our power. As Nana had said, when we have collective power, it is also our responsibility to share that and to move that forward. Sustainable leadership is resourceful. This talks about the grants that Nana has said, and that is really important. It is easy for us, I think, sometimes to get a grant, to develop a program around a grant, and to just sit in that one particular grant. But I have been talking with a number of positive organizing projects around other ways that they can message what they have done that it would be really powerful, either to local community organizing, and it's something that PWN and the caucus and AIDS United also looks at, which is that as we really continue to do the work, that collaborating with other organizations, sharing best practices, and also ensuring that there are resources that might be non-traditional in the HIV world can be really powerful, and it creates solutions. It also means that we're more sustainable as organizations. So if we have, you know, to use an example of a group that is not a grantee this year, they had a great project where they brought together people in a really underrepresented state, and there were not a lot of people living with HIV, but they brought them together for a retreat to amplify and support people. But they had one lead organizer who used the positive organizing grant to fund this retreat. And he got sick, which happens in our world, unfortunately. And the project, while it was great and gave incredible voices to people living with HIV, was not sustainable beyond him stepping down. And so when we think about where we're at now, we also, I think, really need to think about where we've come from and how we move forward beyond just our involvement. So successfully resourcing beyond a single resource is, as Kiara said, is super important, because that helps to support sustainability. Sustainable leadership promotes creativity. This is a picture of Thomas's project that they did, the crew in Los Angeles, that was honoring and celebrating long-term survivors. And I think it is a perfect example. You know, oftentimes when we talk about positive organizing, we talk about it as being politically impacted or engaging leaders around HIV criminalization. And, you know, it can also be that, like this project, we bring people together to provide support, to talk about how living with HIV has impacted their lives, and then to go back to the early days of HIV advocacy, when we used art to share our pain and our stories with people who did not believe that they were impacted.
I'm going to go shopping on Monday.
And I'm going to go ahead and mute. It looks like we got somebody who's going shopping on Monday, which is A-OK. So I think as we're talking about creativity, going back, as we're talking about creativity, it can be creativity in our programs. It can also be creativity to shift quickly and to respond to needs. And so creativity is something that can have a number of different meanings. But like I said, wanted to share this incredible project and brag on it a little bit. Sustainable leadership is based in community activism. Another thing that we need to really understand and recognize is that we are constantly under attack by this administration. And I'm just going to ask everybody if you can mute your phone. There's a little bit of noise coming through. All right, great, thanks. So sustainable leadership is based in community activism. You know, as we connect with our communities, and again, this is sort of, a lot of this overlaps in many ways. Resilience supports our sustainability. This is Olga, who's one of our PWN members, who was arrested 4 or possibly 5 times in support of healthcare last year. She has felt so strongly that she needs to be a part of every protest because, as she says, our lives are an act of rebellion. And by rooting our programs, not just in what we want to accomplish, but also in what our community needs, continues to not only support us as leaders, but it also supports our community. And then finally, and then we're going to get to some questions or comments if that's useful, is relationship transfer. You know, this is talking about sharing relationships with other leaders. And we want to make sure that if we have power or if we have access, that we share it with other people within our community and within not just our HIV community, but also our broader community. So ask yourself, who are you mentoring? Who are you bringing with? Who are you developing as that next leader so that this is sustainable beyond you? And if you don't know anyone, think about who is a gatekeeper in your community. How can you work with them to identify new leaders? And the biggest question is, if you are the only person that they know to call, you need to figure out something different. A number of times people have said, well, I would love to stop working so hard. However, I'm the only HIV positive person that they know who will come to these churches. That can be developed and that can be changed. And so it's just a little bit of a red flag when you say, I'm the only person. Think about how to develop people within the next year. You know, is it that you start bringing people into your planning sessions? Is it that you find somebody who's really interested, but perhaps doesn't have access to a computer? So how do you help them develop technology so that you can then support and grow them as leaders? Nana, is there anything else that you want to add about this particular slide or anything?
No, that was great. I'm excited to hear from folks what their thoughts are.
Great. And so now we're going to go ahead and unmute everybody. And you are all unmuted. And so if there are thoughts or comments, questions, now is time that we can actually sort of really share and share our expertise with each other. And if you're talking, you're on mute.
How many folks are planning to continue this work after the POP grant is over? I see some hands up.
I know that some of my people are planning to continue for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on phone, but
Nana, this is Kevin, and we definitely plan on continuing. We're still by next week we should have a decision whether or not we're going to introduce in the upcoming session in January or the session after that. But we feel there's lots of things to work on besides modernization, and so we are actually going to start discussing whether or not to become our own 501c3 or to continue working with our fiscal sponsor sometime in the next year or two.
Great. That's awesome.
This is Teresa from ICW, and we definitely want to continue, but also put into considerations the TA that we've received, especially working on different populations within women living with HIV and having them lead the project. That is something that we want to see in future.
This is Kunane. Can you folks hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good, because my computer here is a little slow. Anyway, we are hoping to continue, and depending, we have a few, plans right now. It's definitely, we're able to now have a few of our POP members from the neighbor islands and Oahu to be included in our community planning process. That's just starting back up. And definitely the opening day of our legislature, we are going to continue doing that with our POP members. If we can creatively find funding, we're going to also have neighbor islands participate in that day. But we're hopeful to continue with what we've been doing, hopefully through another year of funding through AIDS United. And if not, we're trying to also partner with Ryan White funding and possibly DOH funding in order to keep our POP members involved in the process of planning.
Great. Thank you so much. And I guess as all of you, I'm hearing that, many folks, if not all, are planning on trying to continue resourcing this work, maybe even growing it, which is super exciting. What support do you all need to help make that happen?
This is Tricia. Can I say something?
Yes.
I'm on phone, that's why I can't lift. Okay. One of the things that we've seen, and it's a challenge, I don't know about the other organizations or agencies, is being able to tell our story so that we can attract funding from other partners who might be interested to fund the kind of work that we are doing. So probably in that sense, that is a piece ourselves. We feel we need some kind of support to do that. And I don't know in what sense or capacity, but that's an area that we really need support.
That's great. Thanks for lifting that up, Teresa.
So, this is Kunane. That digital story thing, thanks for mentioning that. Two of our participants were able to create digital stories, and we have a few more that are actually in the process of being finalized. But we did that part of this year with that goal of we have stories to share with whether it's funders or other community members. But we won't, we don't have to get somebody to stand up every single time to tell their story, and that's going to be a huge success once all of the final stories have been edited and completed.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's such a great tool, and it's a tool that you can keep using, and also a tool that can be incorporated into kind of like different kinds of formats. So it can be used for, you know, for funder pitches. It can also be used to like make a policy ask. It can be used to just like share information about who your participants are. So those are really great sort of like everlasting tools. And if people don't know what Kunane is talking about, Kunane, can you just explain what the digital stories are?
So, you know, the digital stories they're just like little 3 to 5 minute, 3-minute to 5-minute, really short snippets where people get to tell their story and share their message, especially what they're passionate about, whether it's their I'm coming out with living with HIV, or I have a specific message because I have an ask for something. But these stories are able to be used in that arena when it comes to really trying to get the word out and get people to put a face and see and hear who we are, you know, who our people are.
Yeah, thank you. And if I understand correctly, that was there's actually like, it's a kind of a workshop that folks participate in. It is kind of expensive, but I think what's been cool is like organizations like Positively Trans have been able to develop sort of a relationship with these and get funding for multiple digital storytelling workshops for folks from their community to be able to create these stories. And so now those stories, it's like a workshop where you kind of like, you know, I think deeply work through a bunch of stuff, and ultimately it's like formatted into like a short video. So it is sort of resource intensive, but there are other kinds of opportunities to do and create materials like that. And that might be something to explore in your local community. Sometimes a local arts project or like a university, especially universities with like a media or communications department, might have, you know, they might have students who need projects, who need final projects. Maybe they can come do something with your organization, like making a short film about your organization or something like that. One of the things we've done at PWN is have people kind of like record their own little videos, because we don't have a lot of resources for that sort of production. But we've had people, you know, just kind of like make their own videos on their cell phones. And then we try to do some light editing if we have capacity for that. But sometimes those little videos can just be used as a standalone. Or you can just like put a little graphic over it or something with like relatively easy editing tools. But Teresa, I'd love to kind of hear a little bit more about the challenges with effectively telling the story. If you could just sort of like parse that out a bit more, because I think this is an important piece of the work. It's like the organizational story, right?
Yes, that's the piece, organizational story, because we find that there's so many people, I mean, many members among or within ICW, they are doing great things wherever they are. Some are in remote places and just are part of ICW by joining virtually, but they're reaching other women. They're making sure that they train them and connect them to different agencies within their states. But these are great things that we need to talk to people, that we are feeling that there's need to do more to collect all that and show the power of women being supported, the power of people living with HIV being supported, being funded, even smaller organizations being funded to be able to reach to others and support them. So it's kind of an organizational piece of saying, hey, this is what we are doing, and we've done this, and we are reaching these great people, you know, in a more, let me say, in a more sexy way. I don't know. I don't know whether that's
that's awesome. I mean,
English word.
Yeah, that's totally great. I think, you know, one just sort of like relatively low resource way to do that, I think, can be in the same way that you collect quotes for something like a grant report, you know, and at the end the funder is like, oh, tell us, you know, one story of a participant who was impacted or something like that. Funders are often asking for that kind of thing. You can always put out a call for you know, stories from your members, and like ask them to submit it in, you know, X number of words or less. You can put those up on a website with their photos. And you can say, hey, ICW does, you know, 5 things, and like, here's like a quote from a member with a photo of like a story of how this work has been meaningful in their lives or something they've done.
Great.
Other ways, other types of support folks are thinking they might need in terms of sustaining their work and next steps?
I'm not sure. This is Thomas from APAIT in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually going to be joining with the people at the HIV Commission in the future to possibly actually become a member on the commission myself. But I've been invited to their meetings, and that's one way I'm going to sustain some of the momentum that I've gotten from the POP project.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I like the idea of maybe doing a summary and getting some of my people together and having them talk about their experience and get it down on tape and see what we can do with that. That'd be great.
Cool. That's awesome. And I think your point also about bringing this work into new spaces is an important aspect of sustainability as well. So thanks for raising that.
All right.
Any other thoughts or questions folks have?
Hey all, this is Matt from Alabama. Our steering committee has also has had a lot of discussions around sustainability, around engaging new leaders for sure, and trying to find ways that they can do that more intentionally for the next cycle. And actually, they've really appreciated these the coaching webinars, because we've been developing a lot in our state, like telehealth, telepresence technology to kind of overcome a lot of barriers around transportation, or much of our state's really rural, and folks who live out in those areas often have difficulty making it, you know, an in-person meeting if it's somewhere that they'd have to travel to, or you may have, you know, competing jobs and schedules that don't allow them to just to be able to as easily join in live. But we were since there's a steering committee for our project, the Alabama Positive Action, one thing that a lot of our steering committee members this year have thought about for the future is how to maybe leverage new technologies to make coaching opportunities like this more accessible, and make the advocacy training work that they do more accessible to folks that can't necessarily physically be there in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Have you been able to identify any other types of like coaching opportunities for folks to participate in, or?
Yeah, part of our project this last cycle, we had some funds, we built in funding to be able to help sponsor folks to attend a national training opportunity or conference. The steering committee identified HYNAC as the one for this year.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were able to fund 5 advocates to send to HYNAC this last round. And they came back and were really excited and pumped and ready to go on that issue from that opportunity. So we're looking for more ways to having discussions on how to find other opportunities like that to make accessible, because that's really difficult typically for folks in our state to access because of cost of travel, registration, things like that, for a lot of opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it was great to see the presence at HIV is Not a Crime of the Alabama contingent. I saw you all rolling in full force. So I think that point also about how, leadership development and sort of connection and mentoring and that kind of support, it can't only live with like one person or one organization. It's a lot of work. And actually there are a lot of resources in our movement to share. So please do feel free to share any of the, like PWN does a lot of webinars around advocacy skills building and leadership development. I know that, there are other entities that are doing those kinds of webinars too. The caucus does some. So definitely please feel free to disseminate any of those for all of you, for folks that you're trying to engage more. I think the more points of contact, sometimes the better it can be for our folks, and then they can choose what they want to participate in and what they don't, and at least they have other like go-to resources, so like you're not left with having to answer all the questions. These are all really great. Any other ideas or questions about next steps folks want to raise before we wrap up? Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I do want to say on behalf of the caucus and PWN, as sort of like joint TA provider team in this on this grant, we're just really excited again by the work you all are doing. We think it's so important. We want to keep supporting it. And so even though the formal grant is coming to a close and the formal like quote TA relationship is coming to a close, we're here for you. So reach out, if you need anything, if you want to just like talk through strategizing, if you're like, hey, I'm looking at this grant, like how should we approach it? Anything like that, we obviously we have a lot on our plates too, but your work is important to us and we want to make sure it continues. So we'll do our best to like get back to you in a reasonable amount of time. And there are other folks on the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus too, who are really committed to all of this leadership development and advocacy work that you all are doing. So we have a resource pool to pull from. And if one of us can't be available for something, maybe somebody else can be. So thank you all for your work. I'm going to put my email in this chat box here so everybody has it. So you can reach out to me, and my cell phone number. Text is much better than calling to find a time to talk. And then here's contact info from both me and Barb. Please feel free to reach out to us anytime. And we look forward to just like seeing you all continue to kick ass. Barb, do you want to add anything?
Nope, I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us today and for sharing both your concerns around sustainability and also being such great organizations for the caucus TA team to partner with. It's been a lot of fun working with everybody, and I just want to say if there is any help that we can give you as you're writing your final report, if you're stuck, especially around stories, that we can certainly help get on a call with you and help brainstorm, because we probably heard you talk about your project in a way that might be able to support you as you're writing that. So with that, I think we can go ahead and just draw it to a close unless there are any last comments.
I just want to say thank you all for taking care of us so well.
Yeah. Well, you're very welcome. It is a labor of love and community support and radical engagement, I think, at least for me, and I think for all of the coaches who have been involved, as well as Nana and Andy and their support, and Julio as well. And so I think that this is a important project. I know it's an important project for all of us, and so thank you for your incredible work in communities that need you so much each and every day. So with that, we'll go ahead and end, and I hope everybody has a great Friday.
Thank you
so much. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.